Hello, Reclaimers. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I am Thais Sky. I'm your host, and we are back to our regularly scheduled programming with a new episode every Tuesday. The past 10 days, we've been doing something a little different over here on the podcast. We have been doing a 10 Days of Worth series that's based off of 21 Facebook Lives that I did back in 2018. And I have so many thoughts I want to share with you about how that experience went, listening to those lives again, because I listened to every episode and then I, put them in audio form and put them all together. I have a lot of thoughts, but before I get into my thoughts, you may have noticed that if there are 10 days of worth, but 21 days of Facebook Lives, that means that there's one more Facebook Live that I haven't shared with you, and I want to do that now. This is day 21. It is so good. We're going to talk about a quick summary of what you need to know about the worthiness wound, 4 areas that the worthiness wound manifests, the danger of normalizing our wound, and then just some additional thoughts on being seen, getting out of our own way, etc., etc. So this is how this episode is going to go. I want to share that final clip with you, and then I'm going to be answering some questions that I got from you from Instagram. I asked all of you, what questions do you have about worthiness, the worthiness wound, or belonging, or taking up space, or being seen, feeling good in your life, any questions you may have for me. So I'm going to answer those questions after this clip, and then we'll see where we go. Oh, and of course, I'm also going to do just a real quick debrief on how it's been to do this 10 days of worth. Okay, so all of that's coming soon. Let's listen to this clip, and then I will check back with you at the other end. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Thais Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. We are talking about just some final thoughts, some things that didn't fit in the other videos. I also want to do just a really brief recap on what I've been talking about for the 21 days. Basically, here's the premise. Here's the premise of everything that I've been talking about for the past 21 days. We've all, for the most part, not all, but on various degrees, experience a feeling of inadequacy. And I believe that feeling of inadequacy, that feeling of non-belonging, that feeling of brokenness, the feeling like everyone got a manual of life except for me, the feeling of there's something wrong with me, that feeling I've labeled as the worthiness wound. And as like most emotional wounds, it stems from childhood, it stems from societal expectations, it stems from familial, ancestral lineage, DNA stuff, and it is exacerbated by our childhood. It is exacerbated by our culture. So I call it like a split, where we quickly realized when we were little that who we are is not okay. And that in order for us to be socially accepted, in order for us to receive the love that we want to receive from our parents, we have to contort ourselves and change ourselves and hide parts of who we are so that we can get love. Some of the things that we've hidden are uncomfortable emotions. So we have a very immature understanding of how to navigate uncomfortable emotions, which is why, for the most part, we try to handle this pain within us through things like mindset and positive thinking. And what ends up, or denying that there's a problem, right? Or just ignoring it. And what ends up happening is that this worthiness wound runs our lives. And some of the biggest ways that the worthiness wound manifests is through perfectionism. So feeling like I can't put this out into the world unless it's perfect, or it's never going to be good enough for my standards. And therefore, I can't, enjoy this. I can't put this out there. Emotional overwhelm, which is this sense of like, I feel debilitated by emotions. I'm emotionally shut down. I numb myself out. I don't know how to handle emotions. And the third one is comparativeness, which is I'm obsessed with what everybody else is doing. And I've covered these three topics extensively in the previous videos. But those are the big three ways that the worthiness wound manifests. Now, I've seen the worthiness wound kind of break down into 4 different areas of our lives. Our competence, so feeling like we don't know enough. Our body, feeling like our physical body is not good enough. Our identity, feeling like the color of our skin or our sexual identity or, the way that we identify ourselves is somewhat inadequate or somehow not enough. And relationship, feeling like who I am is unlovable, who I am is broken. And in order for me to get love from people, I have to contort and change myself. And so you can imagine that feeling this way, even on an unconscious level, creates some big repercussions in our lives. Some repercussions of feeling like we can't put ourselves out there. We can't be self-expressed. We can't be honest. We can't be vulnerable. We have to put up this huge facade. The other kind of opposite of that is we have to hide. So it's either we have to hide or we have to put up a big facade. Like we can't just be who we are. There's this feeling of grandiosity where we have to go bigger than we really are in order to be accepted. And that comes from a deep place of feeling inadequate. And the reason why I've been kind of pushing an understanding of the worthiness wound at a deeper level the past 21 days is because I've seen that no other self-help spiritual work will truly create lasting transformation. It just can't create lasting transformation unless we start to do this deeper work of looking at this emotional wound. Because while we're running away from our wounds, we're simply creating a false foundation. A foundation that's built on defense mechanisms and personality traits that are not your own. And so that's why this is so important. We've got to start to look at the ways that we've developed these defense mechanisms, and that we've developed these limiting beliefs to protect ourselves, when in fact what it's really doing is hindering our capacity to thrive. It's hindering our capacity to truly take up greater space, to be who we really want to be. Okay, so that's what I've been sharing the past 21 days, are specific ways that the worthiness wound manifests, and that we've developed beliefs around who we are and how we should be. And I started to chip at the block and show that in actuality, you are so way beyond this. And one of the biggest, most important messages that I want you to take from all of this is that the worthiness wound is not normal. We've normalized it. We've made it appear normal. We've made it appear as this is just a simple part of, the human condition, and this just what happens, and, there's nothing you can do about it, and you just have to navigate feeling unworthy for the rest of your life. Like society has made us believe that, because society tremendously benefits from us feeling unworthy, because when we feel unworthy, we buy more, we eat more. When we feel unworthy, we obsess over our bodies, and that prevents us from actually doing the work that we are meant to be doing. So while it's been normalized, let me be the first to tell you, this wounding does not have to exist forever. It's not a curse that's just going to be a part of your life and that's it. Like, it's actually a tremendous gift, because if you start to go into the wound, and there's a way to do it safely, there's a way to do it that's not overwhelming, there's a way to do it that the way I teach it, that is actually quite expansive. There's a way for you to go into that space that allows you to transform it and cultivate a deeper resilience, a deeper relationship with yourself. And that's just the most exciting thing. So we can truly honor our gifts and allow it to move through us, so we can make the impact that we want to make. We've got to get out of our own way. You have a gift you got to honor, right? This is the gift. This is your gift to life. You can call it purpose or whatever you want to name it. Like, this is so important. This is so good, because this is your vitality. This is what's going to lead you on the most incredible journey of your life. Yeah, so get out of your own way. And by that, I mean, when you're in that moment, when you're totally debilitated, when you're in that moment where you're feeling really, really overwhelmed, the best thing we can do is to remember who we truly are. So do whatever you need to do to remember who you truly are in those moments. Maybe that's going outside and touching a tree. Maybe that's, lying in the grass. Maybe that's meditating. Maybe that's dancing. Get out of your head. Get back into your body. Remember who you truly are. And then tell yourself, like, this isn't about me. before I go on every single Facebook Live or before I go on stage, I say a little prayer and I say, may I get out of my own way so I can channel whatever is meant to move through me. And whatever is meant to move through me is going to resonate with who it needs to resonate with. And that is how I attempt to let go of how many people are watching me live or how many comments I get, because it's not about that. Even if there's one person, that person's supposed to get something from this. And I'm going to trust that. I'm going to lean into that. And I'm going to get out of the way. And I'm going to allow whatever to come through me to come through me. That's not to say I don't prepare. I do. I have tons of notes. Like I have notes of what I want to say every single day. I have discussion points. I have thoughts. I check on it. I want to make sure that I get the message I want to get that I've planned. And at the end of the day, I've got to let go. Like we talked about, there's definitely 4 places that our worthiness will manifest, right? Competence, body, identity, relationship. So notice where it's coming up for you in your life, and really commit to honoring the gifts that are meant to come out through there. If it's relationships and you're having a hard time manifesting your love, then that's great that this is your opportunity to do your deepest growth. And the growth that you do in this area of your life is going to infiltrate into every other area of your life. Don't run away from it. Don't run. Don't normalize it, okay? Whatever you do, don't normalize the worthiness wound. Don't sit there and act like this is totally normal. This is a part of who I am. This does not have to be your reality. That's an illusion. You don't have to settle for anything less than the very, very best that the world can offer you. So don't believe your own lies that this is as good as it's going to get. It can get so much better. It can get to the place where all of these anxieties just don't bother you. They don't trigger you. They don't hook into you. It's possible because I've seen it in my clients. It's possible because I've seen it in myself. This is lifelong work. It's not going to happen right away, but I'm telling you, don't settle. Don't normalize this. And understand that the worthiness wound is not your defect. You're not defective because of it. This is something that's been indoctrinated into you. This is not your fault. You are not broken because you have this. You are not broken because you feel broken. Right there. You are not broken because you feel broken. Your feelings are not reality. It's very important that we honor those feelings, that we understand why we feel broken and we do that work. But just because you feel broken doesn't mean you are broken. And that's a huge distinction that we want to draw. Okay? Don't believe it. Don't believe it. Get out of your own way. Your gifts are the most important thing. They're the most important thing, not because we want to capitalize them, because we need to sell it, and because you need to live this tremendously big life. In fact, I find that the most incredible existence is the soft life. Yeah, sometimes we get on this hunt for bigness as a validation of our worth. But let me tell you what, none of that matters when you actually feel worthy. How big or small, it doesn't matter. Those aren't even metrics that you use anymore. Your life just is, and it's just wonderful. And you can meet each person in your life with total joy. I know we have this idea that when you feel worthy, you're going to be this big thing, but I'm telling you, it won't even matter. So I used to care so much about the size of my list and the size of my lives and how many people I was getting in my thing. And I was obsessed with likes and how many likes I was getting on Instagram and blah, blah, blah. And I realized likes is not an indication of your worth. How many likes literally doesn't matter. I think I shared the other day, I woke up, I don't know, I was having this weird dream, napping or something, and I woke up and I just had this thought, am I going to hunt my whole life for likes? Is that what this is all really about? Just hunting for likes as a validation of our worth, or whatever that looks like for you, hunting for validation from your boss, or hunting for a number of clients, or hunting for a number on the weight, on the scale. Is this what we're doing with our lives? We're going to be hunting for these external things, like how big our life is as a metric of whether or not we inherently belong on this planet. Or can we find something deeper? Or can we root in something deeper? Or can we believe that there's something way beyond any of that validates us, and it's all here? And our responsibility is to find that as soon as fucking possible, so we don't waste another minute wrapping our heads around things that aren't ours, don't dictate our worth to begin with. And the more that we can unhook from these things, the more liberated we are to just be who we are. And the irony is, when we are who we are in our complete imperfection, the things that we want just come without that
the weight melts off, because that weight is a form of protection to keep you feeling incubated, or the amount of money starts to flow in because you're not so triggered about, your worth around your net worth and all this stuff. Let's unhook from all of that.
There we have it. 21 days of Facebook Lives put into 11 Reclaim episodes. I would love to hear, of course, from you on how those 10 days went for you. So you're welcome to email me at info@taissky.com or reach out to me on Instagram at IamTaissky. But I want to share some thoughts on how it was for me, because maybe it will be of service to you. Maybe it'll support you to see that evolution is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I've always been under that impression that growth and change and exploration of something new is always a beautiful thing. When I first started Worthy Women Rise, it was called Own Your Spotlight. And it was really about predominantly self-expression. I taught about worthiness, I taught about some other things, but it really was about owning your expression in the world. And then I got really, really into the worthiness wound, and I conceptualized this entire idea of the worthiness wound and decided to modify Own Your Spotlight and change it to Worthy Women Rise instead. That was an amazing thing that I did for myself, that I really let myself grow and change and evolve. So often, particularly as entrepreneurs, we may have this impression that consistency is key. And while that is true, it's important to be consistent. We always have to give ourselves space to breathe and to grow and to become a new person. We are allowed to let go of the old. We are allowed to let go of what isn't serving. We are allowed to move onward. And so every evolution of Worthy Women Rise, I have taken in everything that I've been learning and incorporating it into the program, which is why every single program gets better and better and richer, because I'm allowing myself to grow and get better and better and richer. Since I recorded these 21 Days of Worth back in the beginning of 2018, I hadn't started my master's program yet. And so in this 2 years that I've been in my master's program, I'm so close to being done, literally just a couple weeks away from being done this 2-year experience. I've learned so much about psychology that I've now infused into the program, into Worthy Women Rise. And so I noticed myself listening to these 21 Days of Worth, being like, wow, I knew so much then, and I know so much more now. And I'm so grateful that I've created a container in my life where I am allowed to evolve and grow. My relationships want me to grow and get better. My friendships thrive on me growing and getting better. My intimate relationship with my partner thrives on me deepening into myself. My business thrives by me showing up more fully as myself with every evolution of my life. And I know that it's scary to grow because we're afraid that we're going to lose people. And I have lost people. I've lost a lot of intimate, really important relationships in my life by growing and evolving. So that's a very real fear and a very real lived experience that I've had. And I'm sure that you've had too. But also, what's amazing is as we grow, the relationships that come into our lives are capable of holding so much more of ourselves. And it's in these relationships that we then find the meaningful healing necessary for us to continue to unfold in our worthiness wound. Relationships matter. And because the worthiness wound is really grounded in a lot of complex trauma. So trauma that's happened, little lowercase t trauma that's happened over and over and over again in childhood, like not being attuned to. Because the worthiness wound tends to stem from there, it is then in relationships that we're actually going to find our healing, not in isolation. And so giving myself this container of Worthy Women Rise where every single cohort I teach these concepts in a deeper, more profound way, and then update the previous cohorts so they have all iterations of this program has been really rewarding for me. And so this is, I guess, my reminder for you that your growth is a beautiful thing. The world wants your growth. It wants your mastery. It wants your expansiveness. And that while it's very valid to be afraid of growth, it's very valid to not want change, it's very valid to feel like by changing, you also have to grieve lost parts of yourself. Those all are very true. At the same time, you are so much more capable than you think you are. And we want your growth. The world wants your growth. And that's what I've been learning from this experience, is just how brilliant our growth is. And we are allowed to evolve. Your business is allowed to evolve. The way that you show up is allowed to evolve. Trust your desires. Trust that calling, right? We talked about this yesterday. on day 10, that you are allowed to evolve and you are allowed to trust that desire to evolve. Okay, having said that, I want to take some time to answer some questions that I got about all things worthiness. Okay, so the first question goes something along the lines of, how do we get the worthiness wound from our parents if they never told us that we were inadequate? Okay, so this is a really great question, because this particular listener kind of caught to the fact that the worthiness wound comes from parental. One of the influences, one of the ways that the worthiness wound culminates within us is from a lack of support from our parents. And I'll define support in a minute. So if the way in which we grew up, the environment in which we grew up, depending on what happened, can be conducive, I should say, for us to internalize the message that we're not good enough. And so what is that environment? That's what the question is getting at. Like, what is the environment in which the worthiness wound is conducive? And I think this is a really important question, both as we're unpacking our own worthiness wound, and also for those of us who are parents, in making sure that we don't inflict on whatever level a worthiness wound within the child. Okay, so even if your parents never said you're inadequate or you're not enough or, you're broken, they may not have ever used those words for you to internalize the worthiness wound. And most of the times, they didn't say those words. Most of the times, we had what we call like adequate parents, where sure, we may not have gotten exactly what we wanted or exactly what we needed, and yeah, okay, some traumatic things happened, maybe capital T trauma or lowercase t trauma, but overall they were doing the best they could. And, what's the point of kind of even unpacking what happened in our childhood? We're here now, and it's time to do what we can to live our best lives now. Well, the reason why that line of thinking isn't 100% accurate is because we are a culmination of what has happened in our past. We cannot separate ourselves from our past. That's one, right? The past has led us to where we are now. Everything that's happened in the past has shaped the human that we are now. Also, the development, particularly between the ages of 0 to 7, we are massively oriented towards our caregivers. So much so that how they treat us, how we interact, how they relate to us, how they communicate with us, all of that is being internalized constantly for us to understand who we are in the world. So much of who we believe we are, so much of the belief systems we have of the world, so much of our understanding of ourselves comes directly from the interactions between us and our predominant caregiver, usually our mother, but not always, from the times of when we were 0 to 7. So as I talk about in Worthy Women Rise, the majority of the beliefs that we have come to us before the age of 7, which means we're pretty much perpetuating the same perspective and way of understanding the world as we did when we were 7. And that is appalling, right? Because we're not 7, we're now in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And this idea that there's actually a 7-year-old running the show is terrifying. And yet here we are. That is what happens. And so there are specific things that our parents may or may not have done for us that create the belief system that we are unworthy. D.W. Winnicott, Donald Winnicott, was a child pediatrician and psychoanalyst, and he defined trauma as not just things that happened to you that shouldn't have, let's say abuse, neglect, things that happened that shouldn't have happened, but also things that didn't happen that should have happened. And this is where we often find ourselves, where there were certain things that we should have gotten that we didn't get. Not because our parents are bad or wrong or awful humans, but because raising a child is a lot of work. And if they were in their own limited circumstance because of their financial situation or whatever was going on in their lives, they may not have been able to give to the child what the child needed. And what the child needs is attunement. It needs mirroring. It needs reflection. It needs twinship. It needs idealization. It needs a lot of things in order for them to grow up with this inherent sense of worthiness and confidence within themselves. And so like, if a child didn't receive those for whatever reasons to the consistent state that they needed it, the parent doesn't even have to say you are unworthy, you're bad, you're broken for us to internalize that message, because children inherently are narcissistic. And by narcissistic, I mean that they're geared towards self. They have to be. All children are this way. That is why children are, constantly are talking about themselves. Me. That's normal. It's a normal part of our development. Children are constantly trying to understand themselves within the context of the world. And usually when something bad is going on around them or something uncomfortable or whatever, they internalize that message as there's something happening wrong with me. And if they don't have an adult who can really support them in unpacking what's happening and conceptualize and understand, it's very easy for them to feel very alone in that experience. And the ways that children typically try to attempt to gain control over being very helpless, right? Children are very helpless. One of the ways that children tend to attempt control of their lives is by believing, oh, then I'm bad and broken. And if I'm bad and broken, that means I can now do something about it. Versus if my caregiver is unresponsive, if my caregiver is not attuned to me, it's probably something with the caregiver. Children don't think that way. They don't have the neural wiring yet for them to think that way. So that narcissistic trait of, oh, my mom's having a bad day, it must mean about me. If it becomes a consistent thing, it gets internalized of there's something wrong with me for not getting what I need. So for those of us who have worthiness wounds, it's not necessarily that you had capital T trauma, or it's not necessarily that you had abusive parents. It's not necessarily that you had people telling you that you're worthless, though those can definitely be there. And if for those of you who have that there, you'll probably notice that your worthiness wound is a little bit more debilitating. But it doesn't even have to be to that extent. It can literally be my parent wasn't, when I was sad, I had nowhere to go. My parents were too busy, were unavailable, or I felt really alone in my feelings a lot, or I felt like my parents loved me, but they didn't really know how to be with my emotions. They didn't really know how to be with all of who I am. And if we have that experience of my parents didn't really know how to be with that emotion, it's very, very normal for us to internalize this message of I am too much. And that is definitely something I see with the women who join Worthy Women Rise, is this message that they've gotten not through the words you are too much, but through the behavior that tells us, oh, we are too much. Oh my gosh, I just got an email from someone applying to Worthy Women Rise. Ah, that's so exciting. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Your childhood didn't have to be terrible for you to internalize the worthiness wound. In fact, most of our childhoods was not terrible. We found ways. We normalize it. That's what children do. Children normalize. So you don't even know what type of childhood you had for most of us until we start doing this work. So many women in my programs have come into the program saying, oh, I had a great childhood. And then as we're doing the unpacking work, they realize, oh, wait a minute, I normalized that behavior, but that actually wasn't normal behavior. And I remember when my therapist said to me at the very, very, very beginning of our work together, 10 years ago, she said to me, Thais, the way your mom treated you, that wasn't normal. And I was just at the right place in my healing to have been able to have heard that. And that was everything to me, because we don't have context as children. For most of us, some of us, when we start going to other friends' homes, we're like, wow, their parents do this. And then we start saying, oh, my parents aren't like that. Oh, there's something wrong here. But for most of us, we kind of gotten this message that like, oh, my mom's normal. My parents are normal. Everything's normal. And then we start doing this work like, oh, that's why I feel inadequate and broken and like there's something wrong with me. Like, oh, right. It's because while I thought my mom was normal, actually she always acted as if my emotions were way too much. Or like, oh, my parents kind of left me to my own devices a lot. And I felt like the abandonment that I experienced was totally normal. And so I've internalized that. And now I'm super sensitive to abandonment. And so I don't find myself in relationships that are, nourishing for me because I'm always scared that someone's going to leave me. All of this stuff is so deeply connected. And this is obviously the work that we're going to do in Worthy Women Rise. And speaking of Worthy Women Rise, I had the opportunity to do a quick interview with a previous participant of this program where she shared her thoughts on why she joined the program and what she had hoped to get from the program and what she ultimately got. And I want to play that for you here, because I know that sometimes just hearing from me talking about how great the program is isn't quite enough. And there are so many testimonials on my website if you go to worthywomenrise.com. But I want you to hear from a previous participant, and maybe you'll hear yourself in her words. And if anything that she shares resonates with you, this program may be a great fit for you.
My name is Danielle. I live in Washington, D.C., and I am a life coach and a women's circle leader. I've been leading circles for about 5 or 6 years, and I love it. I really feel that it's my passion in life, and I've just recently fully transitioned into doing this work, which is very exciting, but also, transitional times are challenging, so I always channel my inner Thais into what to do during this time.
I love it. So, before you signed up for Worthy Women Rise, what were the challenges that you were experiencing in your life that you hoped the program would support you in addressing?
Yeah. I think a lot of it, obviously self-worth was a huge thing for me. I hadn't really gone into the weeds too much with myself within my own self-worth. And I've been in therapy for a long time and done a lot of coaching and mindset work and relationships and things like that. But it was like this self-worth is such a big hub. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't really dug into it too much. I also hadn't done a ton of inner child work. So those were the things that kind of going into the program, I knew that we would be working on, and I was really looking forward to that.
How was your kind of lack of self-worth or the worthiness wound? How was it playing out for you in your life?
Oh my gosh, in so many ways. Definitely, and I know I wrote about this in my application to you. It was within using my own voice, mm-hmm. Speaking my truth, using my voice, saying what I meaning what I say, specifically in the work environment and also within personal relationships. I could feel there was always a block. It felt like an energetic block in my throat. So I think that was really huge for me. And also, not something I didn't really realize until I started the program, was definitely around control and my relationship with control. And then in regards to self-worth, a lot of it around sex and sexuality, which is something we talked a lot about. So, and that was new for me as I kind of started the program, coming up for me and having that revelation, oh wow, this is something that is a deep wound.
Yeah, I hear that. And how do you feel now that it's been a few months after the program, how do you feel those things were kind of addressed or tended to in the program and now outside of the program?
It's definitely the tools and the discussions that we had are things that I know I'll use forever. A lot of being with myself and being intimate with myself and what that means. That was so huge for me. But a lot of the tools and the practices that we went over in the program are things that I'm still using. I'm still using RAIN and, practicing being with my emotions and with the feeling. And the big thing is sitting in the discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. I love that it's still supporting you. I feel those are tools that once you kind of internalize that they just kind of stick with you,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I remind myself, and this is something that you really taught me. I remind myself to, we say like, be gentle with ourselves, but we don't always actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I give myself that space to have moments where like, I'm not being with myself and like, I'm not feeling the emotion and I'm reacting. And then I always remember, I come back to that space, and come back to the tools and the practices that we learned.
Yeah. What was your biggest concern or trepidation about going into Worthy Women Rise?
I really didn't have too many concerns. I know I've said this, but I had followed you for a while and I felt such a strong connection. I was like, this woman's a badass and I want to, be in a space with her. I want to, take her course or, and then the timing, it worked out. And I think my only nervousness that I had, which is just like whenever I start any type of anytime I start something new or a new class, is who am I going to meet and what will those relationships look like? Will we enjoy each other's company? How will we all show up and how will that affect, how might I be affected by that? But, the nervousness subsided after getting to meet everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the kind of something new jitters.
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you go into a new space, whether it's virtually or in person, there's always like a little bit of that anxiousness / excitement.
What were you most looking forward to in Worthy Women Rise?
Unpacking my worthiness wound and digging deep, and also being in a program that is inclusive and open to all types of women, but doesn't specifically have only one type of woman. Looking around the room, everyone is very different from each other. I love that some of us are moms, some of us have significant others, some of us are single. We all come from different places and are different people and have different interests. So I knew that, from knowing what I knew of you, I knew that would be something that would be in the space. So there was that piece. And also I loved, the discussions that would happen around social justice, because I think oftentimes, when we're digging deeper within ourselves, especially in like that type of world, there's a lot of, there can be a lot of fluff and a lot of people not necessarily addressing the bigger issues. So I really loved that it had all of those components.
Yeah. And what did you end up finding like was surprisingly your favorite component of the program?
The inner child work. Yeah. I mean, going into it, I knew that was something that I kind of hadn't really worked on that much, but I guess like when people in the past have been like, oh, I've worked so hard on my inner child, I've kind of just been like, all right, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, me too. And like I go back in time and recognize her, but it was so different that I really loved that meditation and also the future self component too. I loved that. And that had such a huge impact on me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, it was just there's so much content packed in, and it's developed in such a beautiful way, and the flow and how things are layered onto one another. I don't know. I really loved it and would recommend it for anyone that, feels drawn to do this work.
Okay, so that was Danielle. I absolutely love her. We are actually doing one-on-one work together now, which has been just so beautiful. And one thing that I love that Danielle mentioned, and this is actually a question that I got through my Instagram, is like, what if I don't fit into the group? And this is such a valid question that Danielle addresses, and also that I experience a lot when going into something new, of like, what if I don't fit into the group? And for those of us who have a worthiness wound where we are very sensitive in social environments to being rejected, to being inadequate, we're comparing ourselves, groups can bring up a lot. And that's exactly why I made Worthy Women Rise into a group experience, because like I shared earlier, relational trauma requires healing within relationships, and worthiness tends to be a relational trauma. And therefore, the best way to heal it, the best way to actually radically change it for good, forever, is through relational contexts like this program. And so I facilitate this program in a very strategic way so that not only will you be seen in your own individual play and you will get the support you need for your own individual experience, but you'll also have the opportunity to lean on other like-minded women and experience maybe some of that hesitation, some of that challenges, but you'll have the space to be able to bring it into the group so we can tend to it once and for all. It's one of my favorite aspects of the group is the coaching group element. And women tend to leave the group feeling like the group element was one of their favorites, because there's nothing like hearing yourself in other people's stories. There's nothing like realizing that you are not alone in this. And there's nothing like leaving with a community of women who get to have seen you in a really vulnerable way. And so all of the weariness around the group, around what it means to be in relationships, all of that needs to be tended to in relationship for it to change. And that's what I'm offering in Worthy Women Rise. So if you're interested in learning more, go to worthywomenrise.com. Doors close February 26th and we begin March 1st. Okay, that will be the last time I talk about that. I want to answer my final question that I got. Well, I got many questions, but I feel like this question really needs to be addressed, because I know that, this listener is not the only one who's listening, who has this question, which is, I can't stop obsessing about what other people think about me. Like, I feel so paralyzed and I don't know what to do. Help. Okay. This is a really big one. And I talk a lot about this on my Instagram. The reason why that we obsess over what other people think about us is because that is how we were wired from an early age to be in order to feel safe. This is not only biological, by the way. We, have to, as social creatures, be hyper aware of what other people think about us in order for us to not be ostracized from the group, which would mean, we're now off to fend for ourselves against tigers, right? So we evolutionarily, this is still a really important part of the human condition, even though now we're obviously not going to be left to the tigers. But this is also very much a familial influence of being hyper attuned to what our predominant caregiver was thinking and was feeling was necessary in order for us to maintain the connection we needed with them, right? Everything, our entire psychology is built around our need to maintain attachment. And I'm not talking about attachment from the spiritual perspective, which in a spiritual conversation, particularly in the Buddhist conversation, attachment is bad, right? We don't want to be attached. No, I'm talking about a language that's very specific to psychology, which is this idea of the way our psyche is developed is through attachment, through being connected with another individual. And as babies, because we are so helpless and so hyper attached to our caregiver, it's very important that we're able to read their faces, that we're able to attune to them, so that we can understand what we need to do in order to get our needs met. Now, if they were also attuned to us and met us in the middle and saw us and mirrored to us and attuned to us, then we get to develop this sense of self, this sense of confidence, this sense of worth. If they weren't able to offer that to us, it now becomes solely our job to kind of get that need met. And I'm talking more about emotional needs than physical needs, right? I'm not talking about the need to eat. I'm talking about the emotional need for us to be seen in another as a child. And so if our predominant caregivers were not able to be emotionally attuned to us, it was then our responsibility in order to get our needs met to be attuned to them. And so that is where we developed this strong need to be thinking about what other people are thinking about us, right? So I just want to conceptualize that, because I think we're all so hard on ourselves. So like, why do I so care about what other people think about me? But it actually comes from a real valid biological need to survive. And it doesn't mean that there's something bad or broken here. Of course, now that we're kind of become attuned, aware anyway, of the fact that we don't want to be doing this anymore, now there's tools that can support us in orienting ourselves inwards. But the need itself is a very valid need. And I don't want to, pathologize it or make it sound like you need to change it or fix it, because it's really important for us to know just how important it is for us to be in relationship with one another. Okay, so you can't stop thinking about what other people are going to think about you. This is important. This is a biological need. We're driven to have this need. And it's also, a way in which we can then manipulate the situation. And manipulate, I know, has a negative connotation, but I really mean that it gives us a sense of more control, right? Which again, when we're helpless babies, we need that control, as much of it as possible, especially if we haven't been taught the healthy amount of control. But now as adults, it's time for us to kind of loosen the reins a little bit and really trust that people are going to think what they're going to think about us. And it's not really our responsibility for us to measure and weigh what they think about us. And so one of the things that I've done personally, this is one of the many things, this is not the only thing, one of many things that has supported me to slowly detach away from what other people think about me, is to really continually ask myself, wait, but what do I think of them? Right? To really center my own experience, because we don't often stay in our own experience, do we? By being obsessed about what other people think about us, we then lose our experience. This happens particularly, when we are afraid of being rejected. We can create whole stories about what the other person is thinking about us. And then we forget to check in on how we're experiencing what is happening, right? So again, because we had to be attuned to the caretaker for our own needs to be met, we have lost our own experience in our lives, and now it's time to center ourselves again. But it's hard to stay in our experience, particularly when there's a deeper wounding at play, because to do so requires courage to feel into the abandonment, into the wounding, the fears, the emotions. So instead, we often project our feelings onto other people and assume that that's how they're feeling about us, or we're obsessed with what they must be thinking about us. For me personally, it never ceases to amaze me how sure I am about what someone is feeling, only to ask and find out and realize that I was totally wrong, right? I'm sure that they hate me. And then when I ask, it's oh, actually, you were just living your best life and you weren't even thinking about me at all. So what I've begun to learn is that staying in my experience means bringing my attention inward and getting curious whenever I find myself making conclusions about other people's behaviors or obsessing about what other people think about me. So I ask, if I'm obsessed, oh, this person hates me. It's well, how do I feel about that person? Is there a part of me here that really feels this need to be attached to this person? What's happening here? Instead of kind of reading into the lines, I'm just, because we don't know, right? We don't know what's happening with the other person. We won't know until we ask. But what we can certainly get curious about and know is what is here for us, and to take ownership of what is here for us. And this is the real power. This is where we then actually get to have more control over what we can control and release control over what we can't control. Okay, so next time you're obsessing about what someone else is thinking about you, see if you can take a breath, check in, see what's the obsession, what's happening. Is there a fear of rejection or that they won't like you, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's okay, and then what do I want? How do I feel towards this person? Is it true that I know what they, that they don't like me or whatever? And can I be with what is happening here? The fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear if somebody doesn't like me, that means that I'm unlovable. Can I be with that? Can I be with these core wounds? And that will support us slowly and gently into the freedom of letting people off the hook. Because we don't have to be liked by the world in order to like ourselves, right? But I know you know that. Okay. Whew, this has been a beautifully long episode. I hope that it's filled with nuggets for you to let inward. This past 10 days of being on the podcast and talking to you all about the 10 days of worth has been magical. So thank you for being on this journey with me. And as a reminder, doors for Worthy Women Rise close next week. If there's even an inkling, a pull within you to learn more, go to worthywomenrise.com. And spots are limited. Half of the spots are already taken. traditionally doors have closed before the official doors close because of maximum capacity. So if this is something you're thinking about, I wouldn't wait. And you can also email me at info@thaissky.com if you have any questions. And I will catch you next week. Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.